All right, we are back here on the Just and the Suffering podcast. Doing this kind of an annual tradition now. We do the NBA crossover with my good friends from the Sorry to Interrupt podcast. Sean Rowe and Tom Bocchino are both back here. Guys, welcome. How are you?
What's going on, man? How are you?
Long time no talk, man. Good to be with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long time no talk. Oh, man, not that as much NBA in the pod this year because the Rangers kind of took priority for me for a little bit. But from what I can gather from the playoffs, I feel like it's been a really sort of odd postseason in terms of like what's been going on here. What's your general take from the playoffs? What we learn about the NBA in this playoff run?
Sean, I mean, I'm going to let you take the reins on this one. I feel like we talk about this on our pod every week about how weird this playoff has been and whether or not it's an anomaly or they need to make some changes. So why don't you go ahead, because I kind of echoed your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't really know what changes you absolutely have to make unless you want to give more rest days in between the games in the second and third round as much as they give in between games in the first round. I think especially in those 1-8 matchups that Tom and I have talked about, the 2-7 matchups, you're getting 2 or 3 days in between games that are 4-game sweeps generally in those outcomes. But honestly, I think this is just an anomaly, Tom. I mean, we've talked about it, and like pretty much what we've said is you're getting some of these games with a lot of injured players, players worn down. You're getting teams just absolutely going through horrendous stretches while another team, catches fire. We've seen that in this finals, kind of a microcosm of the entire postseason. So I think it's more of an anomaly. And also, too, is I think in some cases the best teams didn't win. I mean, Boston's a very good team. I can't take anything away from them, but Milwaukee was probably the best team in the East, and they lost in the second round. And Phoenix had their debacle in round 2, and I think a Phoenix Golden State series probably would have lended itself much better than Dallas did. So those were kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I think the thing I noticed specifically when I was watching these playoffs, Sean, is just sort of the whole all the injuries, all the big guys. I mean, the Bucks lost a series without Middleton. You saw the Heat were really banged up against the Celtics, the conference finals. You want those series flip if those injuries don't happen here. And just like a lot of these games, I feel like turn into blowouts pretty early. I mean, you see games these teams are up 30 in the second quarter. I'm just sitting here watching, why am I invested in this so much? Because this is not really the best product the NBA could be putting out here.
What do you think, Tom?
I mean, I tend to agree with Mike. I mean, you look at the Heat series, and obviously it went 7, and we said that on our podcast too. It makes it feel like it was a competitive series, but every game seemingly ended in a 20-point blowout. The Bucks series was much more competitive, and then on the Western Conference side, I mean, it was really a head scratcher this year, and I say it all the time. I go back to that the NBA season and the NBA playoffs are too long. But it's honestly not even worth wasting your breath because the only way that gets changed is if they cut out playoff games, regular season games, and we all know that's not going to happen because the owners have become increasingly greedy. And once you add games to the schedule, you're never going to turn around and minimize them. I do have to agree. The one thing I think you can cure that with is what Sean said, because I think we can all agree that the season has gone on too long, is possibly in those 1-8 matchups, you can eliminate a rest day because that's really the only way we're going to be able to shorten this.
You'll have to do it for the whole first round, though. You can't make it an exception just for those lopsided matchups because you never know what can happen. That's just not fair.
Oh, no, I agree.
But the entire first round series, there doesn't need to be 2 or 3 days travel days, particularly when you're in conference. That travel is not nearly as extensive as it is in the finals.
And for the most part, the series, aside from the 4-5 matchup, are pretty chalky anyways. The higher seed usually wins out. So I think if you eliminate a day or 2 of rest, I think that might cure it a little bit. I feel like we're in June now, and I love basketball. Sean and I talk basketball pretty much extensively on our podcast during the season. But I'm ready for it to be over. And I'm sure hockey fans are ready for the hockey season to be over as well. It's just way too long.
Yeah, I agree with you guys on the rest days of the playoffs. I mean, we're sitting here. I mean, the NBA finals started on June 2nd, and they're going to end on June 19th to go 7 games, which feels like way too long when you're basically racing through the second and third rounds at the rate they go.
That doesn't bother me as much because if you've made it to this point, you earn those extra rest days, and it makes the product better. It's definitely those middle tier rounds where you've got Boston, Miami, who each of them are struggling to field suit up their best players. And it's like, one travel day between Boston and Miami and one travel day from Miami to Boston. And it's just like, these guys need an extra day. It might mean Marcus Smart plays in this game. It might mean Robert Williams plays in this game. And, that definitely hurts the product, which hurts the viewership because the games they're really not all that appealing.
Yeah, people are turning it off at halftime. And I think the Heat series was really what did it and sparked this conversation because of how many blowouts there were. With you're missing Hero. I think if they had one extra day of rest there, Hero might have been able to play. Lowry looked like a corpse. Jimmy Butler obviously was dead at the end, although he put on a great performance. And I think that was just a war of attrition. I think if they had more off days, maybe that series, even though it did go 7, is a little more interesting. And who knows, the Heat could have won that series.
Yeah, I think they definitely could have. And I do think in terms of the other series, I mean, the Golden State Dallas, sort of like Dallas just lucky to be there, in my opinion, because again, you point out like, Phoenix basically just like laid a massive egg in the semifinals and should have won that series and ended up losing it. And like, that's no fault of Dallas. It's more of the fact that I think like Phoenix not getting it really killed the West.
That's what I'm saying. It was kind of a fluke year in that regard, right? Like, I mean, even Milwaukee, they outplayed Boston pretty much that entire series while losing a couple up until Game 7 when Boston just ran them off the floor. But if Milwaukee advances and Phoenix advances, we're talking probably about much better, more competitive. Not that the Boston-Miami series wasn't competitive, but particularly in the West, that series would have been much more fun and probably would have taken a lot more, there would have been a lot more fun to watch as opposed to just how many games does Golden State polish Dallas off.
Yeah, so
I think we do have to point out, though, that there was apparently a COVID breakout during that series. Shocker for Phoenix, and one specific player had COVID. I think we can all guess who had it. By the way, he played. I mean, CP3 was brutal.
Yeah, I know. It just adds to his very rough run there in postseason history. Yep.
Yeah, let's move on from the playoffs. Let's go to the offseason here because that really seems to be all of the two teams around here care about here. And the Knicks, Tom, I think they have a very interesting offseason because they really underachieved this year. Question number 1, Mitchell Robinson, are they bringing him back, yes or no?
I mean, I think it really depends on what his market is. I was reading up on it. It seems like he's going to fetch in the 4-year, $48 million range. I think it really depends on the draft. I'm looking at 2 players right now in the center out of Duke and the center out of Kentucky that if they go out and get him, I think Mitchell Robinson's all but gone. And I would honestly prefer they do that. I like Mitchell Robinson for his inside presence, but he doesn't bring really anything else to the table. Not to mention, the guy cannot stay on the floor. I mean, I feel like he missed a full season, and then every other season he's been in and out. I wouldn't mind if you got Durant or the guy Mark Williams out of Duke instead, and I think they could do a lot more. So I think it really depends on the draft. If they don't decide with, I believe they have the 11th pick.
Yes.
To go out and get one of those big men, then they're going to end up re-signing him. But you know what? The center position in the NBA kills me because you can go out and get. I mean, look how impactful Robert Williams or Kevon Looney have been throughout the season. You don't have to pay these big name players because then you're going to end up in a situation like Utah, unless you have one of the, I don't know, big couple centers like Embiid or the Joker or whatnot. Like paying a center basically wing guard money is kind of a death sentence in the NBA, and you end up in limbo like Utah is right now. And that's
literally, we're seeing the Phoenix Suns, who took DeAndre Ayton with the number 1 overall pick 4 years ago over Luka Doncic, over Trae Young, and they're going to likely sign and trade him. If they're not even going to give him a second contract, and last year at this time we're talking about how he's one of the most impactful players on a Phoenix team that took a 2-0 lead in the finals. Like, you want to talk about how little impact centers have. There's really your open shut case.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, say from my perspective on the outside, I'm like, does it make sense to give the money to Mitchell Robinson where, yes, he rim runs well and he's a great interior presence, like, in terms of utilizing your assets, and there he has some bad contracts in the books there, like, are you paying him when you could, for example, go cheap there, maybe run Jericho Sims out there with like Noel and give Toppin some run at the 5 and use your money elsewhere? I think it might not be the best use of resources if you re-sign Robinson.
Completely agree with you. I mean, the most important thing about Robinson is that the guy can't stay on the floor, and then he's, aside from the rim running, like you said, he's a zero on offense, and he's very good interior defensively. But a lot of these centers now, you want a switchable center. You look at a guy like Robert Williams who can step out and give Steph Curry a hard time, but he can also block shots, and you don't have Mitchell Robinson doing that. I mean, I would put Mitchell Robinson in the bottom end of the NBA when it comes to centers. And the fact that you're going to pay him just because he does one thing in an elite way, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I know we're going to talk about the draft, but I really got my eye on those two centers because honestly, I think when these two centers come into the league, they're going to be better players than Mitchell Robinson and obviously healthier players than Mitchell Robinson right off the jump, first tip of the season.
Yeah, Sean, also in terms of like the Knicks here, I think this was fascinating with them. It's just they have so many like of these like young guys who I think they have like a ton of guys like 24 and under with whether it's like
we've literally been saying this for 20 years.
Yeah, I mean like
this, yeah, but unfortunately, they don't have the coach. Like they talk out of both sides of their mouth because of what happened last season, which was a fluke, and I've been saying that since probably the first third of this season. Their coach doesn't want to play any of these young guys and get them any run, and he wants to stick with his guys that, you know, are very singular players. They're only good at one thing, and they're going to be gone after their contracts are up, and there's no future for them. And that's honestly the biggest problem for me with the Knicks is the fact that I think that your coach doesn't really fit exactly what you're trying to go for right now.
Yeah, I mean, you look at all the guys there. I mean, you didn't really get a ton of run for Obi Toppin. He should have probably had more run quickly. You don't know what you're going to do with him long term. I mean, they traded for Cam Reddish, never played him before he got hurt again, which made no sense at all. They have a first round pick to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at it like it doesn't make a ton of sense when you see how they're structuring this roster, which makes you think, you know, like, are they going to try and turn some of these guys into somebody else? I mean, I don't know what you could even do because the Julius Randle contract really sort of like gums up their works.
I think with the worst thing that, you know, it's going to sound like I'm being, a really bad guy here and a bad co-host and friend, but, and I'm certainly in no position to really brag about this predicament my team's in, which I know we'll get to, but I think the biggest problem that the Knicks have is that they are not an attraction for the best players. So the players they get are guys that other teams don't really want to pay. And on top of that, too, you've also got young guys that they hype up or their fan base hypes up more so than they probably are worth hyping up. And as bad as it is that Thibodeau is not playing guys when the season's long over to figure out what their value is, or at least see if they're going to be sticking here, I really don't. I think he's probably saying, look, I get these guys in practice all the time. They're not as good as you think they are. So with those things being, all factors, I really don't know what the Knicks' best likelihood is of, really, really increasing the value and probably the productivity of this roster.
I think I have one theory here, but it does take some help from the outside here. I think really the only shot they have to get significantly better is like, if Donovan Mitchell gets pissed off in Utah, says, I'm only playing for the Knicks, trade me there and just make a package work. I think it's the only way you really get something magical happening with them in the offseason.
Tom, we talked about him. You got to talk about how you feel about Donovan Mitchell right now, because it certainly isn't what you felt about him last year.
No, I mean, I see a guy who is just lost in Utah, and maybe a breath of fresh air would be good for him. But, I mean, he came out of Louisville as a defensive superstar. I mean, a strong, long player. And he plays zero defense. He's an absolute turnstile. And then on offense, I see a guy who probably on a championship type team is a third, second best player. I'm a little sour on Mitchell, and the only guy on the team I really don't want to give up for him is RJ Barrett. Anybody else, see you later. I don't care. Even Quickly, I like him, but Quickly, I think his ceiling might be, a little bit better than Jamal Crawford, and I'm willing to give that up for Donovan Mitchell, but I'm not willing to give up draft capital and RJ Barrett for him at this point. And to be honest, I'm not willing to give it up for Dame either, because if you take a look at that contract, he's making $50 million a year, basically, over the next 3 years, and I don't know what that oblique, whatever rib, whatever body part he's got hurt. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know if he's still there, like in the top 10 anymore for me.
In some ways, Donovan Mitchell to me seems like the kind of guy that will come over and Knicks fans are all excited, and then they watch him play every night instead of just the 2 or 3 times a year when Utah plays the Knicks, and they're like, "Oh, this guy's actually not as good as we thought," and then they turn on him.
Is he Stephon Marbury? I think he's better than Marbury, but
yeah,
putting him in that same category.
That's how starved this franchise is for legitimate star power. Like,
yeah.
And that is, again, the conundrum that they're in, because they have fine players, Tom. I mean, you and I went back and forth with Julius Randle, but I've always thought Julius Randle's gotten a shit end of the stick from the fan base, because if you just look at him for what he is, he's a fine player that most teams would want. But when you're asking him to be when you're giving him the first option and the keys to the car, okay, well, he's going to look a lot worse when he's the lead option in a playoff series. They're paying him. His contract's not nearly as bad as people make it out to be. And again, that shows the reason they gave him that much money is because the guys they would prefer to give that money to don't want to come here.
Yeah, that's true. I think.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, I think also the one thing with this roster that's been this team for about 8-9 years at least hasn't tried to find a point guard. And right now, I mean, there's none in the draft. They're not going to make it to them at number 11 unless you're hoping like Dyson Daniels is like a superstar, or Ty Washington is a big thing out of Kentucky. Like, I mean, you're sitting here, your options for A's aren't great. I mean, are you overpaying Jaylen Brunson? Are you going and signing Tyus Jones and hoping he makes an impact here? I mean, like, there's not much really can do, I think, in that front to really make things like super interesting on the point guard front.
No, but also I feel like we're reverting back to the old Knicksy ways where we're getting desperate and we're going to trade the farm for a player like Mitchell and whatnot. When I mean, the real problem with this team is how inept they've been lately with drafting. I mean, the only good draft pick you can say that they've had over the last few years, excluding Porzingis, over the last what seems like 10 years, is R.J. Barrett. I mean, and they've just done an absolutely awful job. I mean, the Phil Jackson era obviously was a joke, but aside from that, that's what they're going to do in the draft this year. Is they're going to reach for a point guard, and then he's never going to play. When really, what you need right now is a center, so you don't have to pay Mitchell that much money.
I have an idea. How about you just draft the best player on the board instead of for need? That's what's gotten the Knicks in trouble a lot. They draft players for need instead of just drafting the best available player. If the player's good enough,
agree.
You'll figure it out.
That's my point. Is I think that guy out of Kentucky is going to be the best player on the board, and I think they need to go after him because. My whole thing with the NBA is unless you're 1 or 2 pieces away from being a competitive, compete for a championship team, and you're saying you're going for a positional need as opposed to best player available, then you're an idiot. Because what do you need the best player available for when you need 10 of them?
Right. And that's what they've done, unfortunately. You know, I think they've had decent value of late with some players that they've taken, but, you know, I think as far as just taking the best player on the board and figuring it all out later and getting a coach that actually wants to coach them, that's very important because I don't know if there's been a lot of synergy there between the coach and the front office over the last 2 drafts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the drafts here. I mean, since the Porzingis pick here, I mean, it's not been good. I mean, Frank Ntilikina, Kevin Knox, RJ, and then Obi Toppin with the ones, and you add in guys like Quickly and some of the other role players there. I mean, they have been a very bad drafting team for a while.
I mean, yeah, that's the next MO is that, you know, they just bring in yet another GM that they think is going to lure in these free agents like they did with Worldwide West and whatever because of his Kentucky connections. And it never works out. And these guys aren't draft guys. They're connections guys. And then they end up taking a long shot guy every single time that never works out. And that either gets traded before their first contract is up, dwindles away on the bench, or gets cut.
Yeah.
What I think the Knicks need to do, Mike, just real fast is, and this is not going to sound popular, but fuck it, here it goes. Like, I really think that they just need to embrace the small market rebuild and not necessarily push for. By the way, I'm sorry for swearing there. I didn't mean to.
They're always half pregnant, and that's the problem. And when you're sitting in limbo, that's the worst place you're going to be because you're going to end up with the 11th pick every single time in a 3-player draft that this is where it's the 3 best players, and then there's another tier that has 5 players, and 3 plus 5 does not equal 11.
But you see small market teams, like where I was going with that is like they're never going to be a star attraction, right, for the free agents. So they have to build through the draft. They have to make good trades, and they have to make savvy free agent additions on those lower tier kind of players and build good, continuity and a nice culture. The Knicks are kind of caught in between, as you said. Like, they want to swing for the fences, but they're only hitting doubles. And so
and it's New Year,
paying those guys the money, and then you're bringing in these draft picks that don't really make sense with the team, and then you're signing these bargain basement guys like a Kemba Walker or players of that ilk that really don't have a lot of chance to be good when you're good. I thought what they did honestly with Derrick Rose and Reggie Bullock was a lot better than what they did this year, bringing in Kemba and Fournier. Not that there's a knock on Kemba from his personality, but he's clearly been done for a while.
Yeah.
And before we move on to the Nets, the last thing I want to say that we said on our pod, and I just want to get it out there to whatever Knicks fans you have. The worst thing that could have happened to the Knicks is what happened last season when they finished as the 4 seed, because I said it at the beginning of the year, it was an absolute loop. It was a diminished NBA. They basically played 2 seasons in a row, and the Knicks caught a bunch of teams on back-to-backs that weren't playing as hard as them because Tom Thibodeau is a drill sergeant and had the team playing 10 times harder than any other team, when you could see it coming from a mile away that it was just a fluky season and that it didn't mean anything. And then unfortunately, when you finish as a 4 seed, then there's expectations, and the GM and the front office think you're a lot better than you actually are, and you make stupid moves, like bringing in a Kemba Walker, like bringing in Evan Fournier, like letting a Reggie Bullock walk. And now we're in the position that we're in. Instead of building off of that and trying to build an actual team, now we're just out here looking for another superstar with the 11th pick. And that's not going to happen. Or we're going to try and trade for a guy because we can't sign anybody.
Yeah.
The worst part about the playoff run was not making the playoffs. It's always good to make the playoffs, especially when you're a team like the Knicks who haven't made it very often at all.
Of course.
The problem was exactly what Tom said. Is treating that playoff like it was
that wasn't a real 4 seed. That was a Fugazi 4 seed.
Yeah, they didn't build upon that at all.
No, they did. They basically ran it back and just added a couple other guys to it. They basically said, we had the foundation," and they really didn't.
Yeah, Julius Randle is a top 15 player in the league, and Kemba Walker is the true kind of point guard we need. We'll let Reggie Bullock walk. Look what he did with Dallas. We'll bring in Evan Fournier, who Boston wanted no part of, and he did not help.
Drove him to the airport.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking. I think again, you're right on with the bad drafting index. They're looking at some of the drafts they have. I mean, the year they took Frank 2017, took him the 8th pick. They could have had Donovan Mitchell themselves. He went 13. Bam Adebayo went 14. Either one of those guys in a Knick uniform would be incredible. And then,
bro, don't get me started with that draft. That draft was Phil Jackson was allowed to do that draft, and then he was fired like less than a week later.
Yeah,
I mean that's an all timer. That one still makes me sick.
Yeah, that one's bad. And then the following year, they took Knox with number 9. I mean, the guys right after him. I mean, Mikal Bridges, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Miles Bridges, Michael Porter Jr. at 14, even Dante DiVincenzo. I mean, they're all better options than what they have. I mean, took Knox on a 1-year flyer out of Kentucky.
I just want to say, though, I think it is a little lazy sometimes to just say the names because it's so obvious that the player the Knicks drafted is not good. But if you look at it, they never gave those players a chance to succeed. All those other players went to organizations that allowed them to play and allowed them to mature and had the full confidence of the coaching staff, the front office, and ownership. The Knicks players haven't. So, yeah, the players never turned out to be good, and it's a very easy thing to say how bad they've been compared to some of their counterparts. But it also goes to show that how inept the organization's been. That's I think that's the biggest problem to me. These players, it's not like they had no talent. They went to a place that never really embraced them or gave them a chance to play well.
Yeah,
I agree with that in the sense of Knox and a few other players, but the Ntilikina, let's just not bring that up. That one's sad. It makes me sad.
Yeah, let's go to the other team in town here. Go to the Nets, who have had higher expectations the last few years. They have underachieved, specifically this season. We saw the whole James Harden situation blow up because he got mad and basically quit on them after the Kyrie situation with the vaccine, and then Kyrie comes back late in the year and is it's a usual enigma. This team trades for Simmons, never plays. They lose the first round. Now there's the big question here. I mean, Kyrie has his player out. Just talk about extending long term. The Nets have been surprisingly non-committal on this. So, Sean, I know you're the net guy in the group here. So, what do you think happens here with the Kyrie situation? Do they just end up extending him long term? Because I feel like when you have him and you have KD already locked in, I feel like you're kind of like pot committed to going in after him.
You know, they've talked a big game about, you know, we want players. Sean Marks did his post-season, you know, end of the season press conference talking about how he wants to rebuild the culture that seemingly was lost. And Kyrie, obviously, everybody was like, well, it's a direct shot at him. And yeah, you can certainly say it was, you know, with the amount of games he's missed for personal reasons and then the COVID circumstances you laid out. You know, I think in a perfect world, Marks would like to trade him. I think they would like him to either play on this player option and not do a deal or do a sign and trade somewhere. The problem is there's really not anybody who can afford him. I don't really know who would want him, and I don't really know where he would go that he would be really fine with playing. He said that he wants to play with Durant in Brooklyn around his family. I think what's going to ultimately happen is the Nets are going to give him a 3 or 4 year extension on top of the player option, patching him with Durant, because the biggest thing is even though Durant's under contract and he's never asked for a trade, doesn't mean he won't. And this, you know, partnership between him and Kyrie to win championships in Brooklyn and build the culture in Brooklyn, if you tell him that Kyrie's gone, you're really playing with fire there. So I think at the end of the day, conversations will be had, and he'll get a 3 or 4 year extension, either opting out of the player option or opting in and then signing a contract extension on top.
Yeah, Tom, what do you think of the Kyrie thing here?
It's just such a tough situation for the Nets, but I think there's only one answer, and that's you re-up with Kyrie. You can't lose Kevin Durant, and you can't lose Kyrie Irving because you're not going to get equal value for either of the guys that you trade, and then you go back to being completely irrelevant. They're already the second team in New York, and they always will be, and those are your only two guys. And your championship window is until KD decides to either move on or whatever, and you're not going to get a better player than Kyrie. So, unfortunately, these are the cards you're dealt, and you kind of just got to ride the wave at this point. And also, for me, it's like, well, he already pulled all this crap in Cleveland and in Boston and in Brooklyn. What else could he do? You know, I think maybe the worst, you know, looking at a glass half full, maybe the worst has already happened.
Yeah, maybe. I do think, though, I give them credit for this. I mean, when they gave up all their assets last year for Harden, I was like, okay, I can understand the logic here. You know, you had the big two trying to get the big three. I do give them credit for not just making that a sunk cost trade, you know, realizing that we had to blow this up and just get something here. And they did bring Simmons in, who never played. They brought in the role players and got a couple of picks back here. Like, how do you think they use those assets to try and improve this roster here? Whether it's like retaining some of these guys, getting something out of Simmons who never played again this year. And I thought it was weak to basically ask out of game 4 for whatever reason. And I think, how do you improve this team? Because I mean, they're in a spot where they should be contending for titles, but they're not at this point.
Well, Ben Simmons had back surgery right after the season, and had an epidural very soon after he arrived in Brooklyn. So there was really weird communication breakdowns between the coaching staff, Simmons' agency, and, you know, the Nets, because it didn't seem like he was ever really in position to play. When you have back surgery, that's not something like, oh, I think I'm just going to get that cleaned up this offseason. Like, that's a significant surgery, and he'd been talking about that all the way back to his days in Philly. I think he's going to be a cornerstone of this franchise. I think that their hope is that with him being healthy and not having the mental concerns about his back being really hurt, and being in a place like Brooklyn instead of Philly, he's going to be with Kyrie and Durant, and he's the kind of player that they really need. A long, big, physical, versatile guard who can space the floor. He's a great passer, great rebounder. They desperately need that. Patty Mills' player option is up. I'd like to have him come back. I think he's a really good player on a championship team off the bench. Joe Harris was out this whole year, too, and they really, really missed him. If you have Joe Harris, Patty Mills, and Seth Curry, who's coming back, Those are really good 3-point shooters that are going to just make life a lot easier for Durant and Kyrie. Drummond, maybe. It sounds like they want to give Claxton his money as a restricted free agent. They'll match any offer sheet. Outside of that, they're going to have a lot of money tied up in 3 guys. So you're going to be, kind of scouring the other very low end of the free agent market to bring in guys that want to be a part of it.
Let's just hope that they could do a better job than Paul Millsap and Blake Griffin.
Yeah, that was really it. I mean, Aldridge, when he played, he was good, but he didn't play in the postseason. Blake Griffin was out of the rotation. Bruce Brown had a really nice year. It'd be nice to bring him back, but he might have priced himself out of the Nets. They do have the 2023. They deferred Philly's pick from the trade from 22 to 23, making that a nice, attractive asset to move either this summer or come the trade deadline if they need a piece. And they have 2 major trade exceptions, too, that they can use for players. So we'll see. They have to be creative. But I believe everything will be built around Simmons, Irving, and Durant.
So basically, it's just a matter of what role-playing guys Durant calls up and says, hey, come play with me, who he gets to come with him.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of players that want to play with Kyrie and KD and a healthy Simmons. That is just the position the Nets are in. For as turbulent as it's been, and it has been that, if you tell free agents who want to win championships that you get to play with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, that's a very attractive sell.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And let's go to the draft for a minute. I mean, we're not going to go nuts and bolts on the entire thing here, but there's a very clear top 3 out on the board. I mean, if you want to count Jaden Ivey as 4, fine, but I mean, the top 3 is pretty much consensus. Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, and Paolo Banchero in some order here. So I know how much you guys were on the college stuff here watching these 3 guys. So, who do you like the most on an NBA perspective?
Tom knows his college basketball.
Paolo, it's not even close. It's not even remotely close. I think he is a mix of Chris Webber and a slightly less athletic but much better basketball playing version of prime Blake Griffin. I think he could be a number 1 player on a championship team when it's all said and done. Listen, the one thing that worries me is the lack of defensive intensity at Duke, but when he did decide to play defense, he was a great shot blocker, a really good secondary defender coming over on double teams, coming over to help on the weak side. He has a really good basketball IQ. He can shoot it. He's got a fluid jump shot, and I'm telling you, every year his percentages are going to go up. He's already got post moves. He can really handle the ball, and he can pass, man. I was watching a lot of his highlights. He can really pass the rock, and his feel for the game is incredible. Paolo is by far the number 1 for me.
Yeah, Sean, do you agree with that? You have somebody else you like?
No, I agree with Tom as far as, the attributes that Banchero has. Yeah, I've been a Jabari Smith guy the whole season. I did not think that he had any help at all from the point guards that he had to play with at Auburn, who would just absolutely hijack games from him. Listen, his shooting's not great, but you can't deny the athleticism. I think you put him in and he's an immediate impact player, whether he's picked first, second, or third. Banchero seems like the more polished player, but if I'm going just for pure upside, I think Jabari Smith is the guy, especially defensively. You talk about Banchero, maybe not 100% committed on defense in certain times. You don't have to worry about that with Jabari. Just his length, his size, his physicality. I think you could teach him to be a little bit better shooter, but the kid's got it all, and he's got a really high motor too, which I love.
His issue isn't really shooting, though. His issue is more the fact that, and the thing that scares me about him and why I've got him as a definite number 3 behind the other 2 is the fact that I don't think, and this might have to do with what you said with the lack of touches because of the point guards, but he is not able to put the ball on the floor more than 2 times. I don't think he's going to be much of a dribbler.
I don't think they wanted him to.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, well, it does concern me, though.
Sure. If you haven't seen it, it lends itself for concern.
It's funny you guys took the other 2 guys because I'm a big Chet guy. I think Chet Holmgren is probably the top guy in this class. I think obviously he's gonna get dinged for his frame because he needs to put weight on from the 195. But as a shot blocker, this dude is gonna be the difference maker in this league, and he can shoot from the outside. He can operate the floor offensively. If you give him a solid like 20, 30 pounds of muscle on that frame, like he's still going to be ridiculous.
I don't ever think he's going to get that much muscle, but I don't think it's really going to matter because if he goes into the right situation with a more interior true center, like I guess you could look at it as like a Wendell Carter in Orlando, he's going to be able to be that kind of free safety where he can defend somebody on the perimeter, but then he can come in on the weak side and get that block after Wendell gets beat or whatnot. And I mean, yeah, he can pretty much do it all on offense. I mean, people comparing him to Kevin Durant. I know we're not allowed to curse on this podcast, so I'm just going to say GTFO. Kevin Durant's one of the top 10 players of all time. He's probably second, maybe the best scoring forward of all time. But I mean, I think he's going to be really unique. I don't think he's going to be like a 35. I don't ever think he's going to be able to get in that 30 points per game. But I think he's going to be able to average, 19 and 10 per game for 10 years as long as he can stay healthy. I just think that Paolo's a future Hall of Famer, and I'm really enamored by him.
The thing with Chet, I was just going to say real fast, Mike, is I can see why you love him so much. To me, it's all about the circumstance and how much leash the GM has. If I'm a GM like Sam Presti, who pretty much has a career scholarship at Oklahoma City, I know they're not drafting first, but I'm saying I could take him and really not have any problems if he works out or doesn't. If you're a team like Houston, you took Jalen Green, you're trying to build this team. How much equity do you have if he doesn't play well and the other two do? Orlando right there at number one. How much leeway does that general manager have? If Chet doesn't come out of the gate smoking hot, that's really hard to get up from, right? So if I'm in Orlando, I'm just want to know how much time I'm going to have, because if I don't have a lot of time and it's about immediate impact and how I'm going to get a player to fit with Doug Wagner, then I got to go Jabari Smith or Banchero. If it's hey, you're going to have several years to figure this out, and here's your vision, run with it. You don't have to worry about losing your job. I might go Chet because I really like him too. I would hate to possibly lose my job on him.
Yeah, I think for sure. I have Oklahoma City circle as the Chet spot because the way I look at it here is like, I mean, they are doing the plan with this accumulating 75,000 draft picks. They don't have to win for like 3 years, and you keep getting all this intriguing young talent here. I mean, you put him on that roster with Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Giddey. That's a great three to start with to build the next generation of Thunder dynasty.
Yeah. No doubt about it. And the other thing that's interesting, and we're going to talk about possible trades, is that, I mean, they can't possibly make all these draft picks. They'd have like 7 different Oklahoma City Thunder teams. So at some point, the other shoe is going to drop, and they're going to make a splash for an unhappy superstar that's under contract, and like a Donovan Mitchell or something, where it's, you don't have as much say when you got 3 years left on a deal. And they're offering the best package, kind of like what they did when they went out and got Paul George.
Yeah, I agree with that. Any sleepers you're watching in the draft who you think are getting undervalued in terms of like where they're being put in the box?
I'm looking at this guy Durant out of Memphis. I mean, he absolutely bullied Paolo, and I just think he is Robert Williams 2.0, which is a very valuable player in this league right now. I think he's going to be really special. And then also the guy AJ Griffin out of Duke. I mean, just watching Paolo highlights, it seems like they were just playing off of each other, and every time something good happened for Paolo, it came from AJ Griffin and vice versa. And I think he's a very special player. Although injury riddled in high school, I think he's going to be a really good player.
I think Jaden Ivey's a stud. He's not really a sleeper, but Jaden Ivey, wherever he goes, whether a team trades up to 4 or if Sacramento makes the pick, I think he's going to be really good. Mark Williams, to me, the center out of Duke, he's just a really, really good player. And I've liked Johnny Davis for a while. I know he didn't play great in the tournament, but I think that's a player who's going to be around in the NBA making a major contribution for a long time.
Yeah, I think the guy I love, and I don't know, I mean, he only had one great year in college, but like Ben Mathurin out of Arizona, like he can be dominant if he puts it all together. I think he's very situational. You have to put him in the right place where he can develop, and the coaching staff has paid with him. But I think you have a very good shot at an impact two-way player in Matt Durant if you put him on the right staff.
Yeah, I think so too. He has a lot of
athlete.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say he has a lot of tools. I totally agree with you.
absolutely. And last thing here, go to the NBA free agent here. I mean, I don't know how many big names they're going to be on the boards. A lot of these guys are going to like opt out and sign the extension of their team. So, like, who are some of the big names you are watching in terms of who could be on the move in the offseason?
I mean, I think the first shoe to drop for true free agency is Zach LaVine, right?
Yeah, it sounds like he's going to re-sign with Chicago.
Yeah, I saw that as well. I mean, I think it's going to be more the trades that are going to be interesting this season. I mean, we talked about, you have on the notes what we learned from the playoffs. I mean, a team that didn't make the playoffs, and what are the Lakers going to do? Because, LeBron's going into year 21, and they're hamstrung across the board. What kind of chicanery are they going to do with the cap and with the roster in order to get Russell Westbrook the hell out of there and get LeBron some more tools? And then, and also the other big one outside of Kyrie, which we talked about, is James Harden. I mean, is Philly going to commit to him?
I mean, I think they are. I don't know how long. It might not be the 4 to 5, but I think they got to give him at least 3. I mean, you gave up valuable players that easily could have helped you advance further than you did with Curry and Drummond. And especially with Embiid being hurt, they had DeAndre Jordan playing big minutes. Seth Curry was a big loss for them. So to give up what they did for Harden, that's Daryl's guy. I think that they're going to bring him back. I would be shocked if he didn't come back at least on 2 or 3. I don't think we're going to that.
I agree. It's just, unless he has the longest hamstring injury in the history of mankind, he's definitely lost a step or two.
He's lost several, yeah.
Yeah, I think the guys I'm watching, I think what happens at Ayton out in Phoenix, because obviously they declined to give him the extension, so we'll see if they actually just match an offer sheet, they try and sign and trade him. Miles Bridges, I think, is going to be back in Charlotte, but I think he's played his way into a lot of money here. And honestly, Jaylen Brunson made himself a lot of money, too. It doesn't matter where he ends up.
Jaylen Brunson's a really interesting one, Mike, because you talk about New York and, about him re-signing. Mark Cuban said, he really wants to be here. We'll pay him. He's a really good player. That's it. So if you pay him more than that, or you're the team that, pries him away from Dallas, you're going to get a really good player. And that's all he's going to be. I
think he's a massive product of Luka. And he's kind of got the Luka effect and the Luka shine on him, where, Luka is the planet that everybody orbits around. And I think if you put him in a Knicks uniform or on any other team, like Sean said, he's a really good player. He's probably a starting point guard in the NBA, but you're going to have to pay him like he's an all-star point guard in the NBA, and he's not going to be that. You're going to end up disappointed.
Yeah, and there's a couple others. Chicago's interesting. What's Vucevic's future there?
I think they're going to trade for Rudy Gobert, to be honest.
Yeah, Gobert, obviously, Mike talking about the Utah boys, Gobert and Mitchell. Those are 2 names that will be talked about extensively. Atlanta's frisky. They have a lot of players that they could move. They could move.
Yeah,
John
they could
Collins.
do like a 3-for-1.
Yep, they've been rumored. Brooklyn does want to move off Ben Simmons. They've been rumored as a potential suitor for Simmons. I don't think he's going to be on the move at all. And then, to me, I'm always fascinated with a team like Indiana. Are they going to move off of Turner? Are they going to move off of Brogdon? What's it going to take to get those guys? Are they just going to build the entire thing around Halliburton? There's going to be a lot of names out there. We might see a very active trade market simply because, the free agent class, especially if a lot of the guys return to to their teams, I don't know how good it really is.
Yeah, I feel like Malcolm Brogdon is a guy that the Knicks will be calling on, too, because especially they can't make a deal for Brunson. I feel like they're going to look for that point guard upgrade. I feel like Brogdon will call Indiana and see what it take to get him.
Yeah, I guarantee that call will be made, but I really don't want him. That guy cannot talk about Mitchell Robinson not being able to stay healthy, and Malcolm Brogdon is even worse.
Yeah, that's true also. And I'm fascinated, I think, mostly about this Russell Westbrook thing with the Lakers, see what they have to do
It's incredible. It really is.
to unload that money, because he has 1 year left on the deal. It's absorbent money. And, GM LeBron's going to give himself some more dues to try and win in LA this year. And, every team is going to call the Lakers. They're like, hey, give us that 2027 unprotected one, and you can have him.
But the thing is, the Lakers are starting to stand up to LeBron because he's in year whatever it is, and they're saying, like, you're not going to be here in 2027, nor is most likely Anthony Davis. Anyway. Yeah, and I mean, and Russell Westbrook, the only thing that they have going for them with Russell Westbrook is, like you said, it's only a 1 year deal. So you get halfway through the season, and that's an expiring contract that you can trade, or he's in a walk year following that. But I mean, what kind of finessing can you do in order to get some talent in there when the only asset you have is that 2027 draft pick and nothing else really? I mean, what, Austin Reeves? I mean, or what's the other guy's name? The guy with the two names that everybody thought was good after like three. Yeah, after like 3 G League games. How's he doing? I mean, they gave up everything in order to get Westbrook, and then before that, Anthony Davis. So I think they're kind of hamstrung. And again, LeBron, I mean, he's probably the second greatest player of all time, but he's leaving the cupboard bare at another destination.
Right. And I think they're going to take this into the season and towards the trade deadline, because I don't think they have any other options. His contract, it's somewhat enticing because it isn't expiring. But again,
what's interesting about that is, like we said, LeBron's on year 21, and AD is hurt all the time. Is waiting till the trade deadline. LeBron might get desperate because he may look at it and be like, we might already be out of the playoffs by the time the trade deadline happens at the way things are going.
Here's the thing, and Bill Simmons said on his podcast that if he were GM, he would look to trade LeBron. I don't think LeBron's going anywhere, and they're not going to trade him. He won't ask for a trade because he wants to be there. But you might have to seriously consider trading Anthony Davis, who I still think, for as diminished of a return as we think he is compared to what he was a couple years ago, he's still a 29-year-old bona fide stud when he plays. So do you entertain that? Because I just don't know what teams, because the bad teams are not going to want to inject a Russell Westbrook into their master plan of developing a young team, cohesion, and a culture, right? So then you're looking at those bad teams like a Washington or a Detroit or a Sacramento who aren't any good. They don't really have anything really building. And it's like, well, at least we can get a Russell Westbrook in here to entertain everybody for, a half a season or a season. But again, they could say to the Lakers, if you're not going to give us that first, then we'll give you 2 seconds or like something like that. Like we're not giving you anything that's a real asset. And that's how starved the Lakers are for anything that they could use as potential trade chips, because like Tom laid out perfectly, they have nothing.
It's just amazing. Go back to last year's draft. I mean, when you looked at it, they almost had that deal done for Buddy Hield, and that would have been such a better fit than Russell Westbrook would have been for that roster.
Such a better fit. 1,000%. But GM LeBron, stuck his nose in there and said he wanted Westbrook, and look where they are now.
Yep. Exactly.
And I really hope for your sake that the Knicks don't go anywhere near it.
Oh, dude, I swear to God, if they do that, whenever they're making that deal, I'm calling in a bomb threat to Madison Square Garden to clear out the building. I'll call in one every single day until they put me in jail to stop that trade.
All right, well, there we have
it. Might only take one day.
Our NBA sort of off-season setup here with the guys in the Sorry Interrupt podcast. Sean, Rowe, Tom Bocchino. Thanks for coming on, guys. Before I let you go, we'll keep up with your podcast.
Oh, we're on everything, Spotify, blah blah blah. Also, you can check out the Twitter at Sorry to Interrupt. We put the link up there, and I put some winners and some losers up there as well.
Tom didn't want to, give us any publicity because of his night last night with his bets, but yeah. Mike, thanks so much for having us on. This was fun.